can, in fact, be saved. Our message today, a few weeks ago, for the folks that are on YouTube, I didn't have a YouTube video last week because my audio didn't work. We're trying new audio. It's one of those things of if it doesn't work, keep trying, and we are doing just that. I'm keep trying. 2 weeks ago, I talked to you about a gal named Rahab in the Old Testament. And today, I want to talk to you about another lady from the Old Testament named Deborah. The title of my message today is Meet Deborah. And I'll have to tell you that Deborah is a fascinating lady because she lived in a time of history, in the time of Judges, which was several thousand years BC, when basically women were considered property. In fact, many cultures, unfortunately, many cultures today buy and sell women as property. They have no rights, and this woman, Deborah, not only became a prophetess, but a judge and a ruler. And I have to ask you, how did that happen so many thousands of years ago? Even in our own country, it wasn't until just a few years ago that women were allowed the right to vote. And here is a woman, thousands and thousands of years ago, leading and judging Israel. And I think that is a woman that we need to know more about. So if you'll join me, Judges 4, 1 through 10 is the story of Deborah. And it says, "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And he commanded an army, his commander of army was Sisera, who lived in Haresha Haggim. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lebedith, was judging Israel at the time. And she used to sit under the palms of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinadab, from Kadesh, and I'm really going to butcher this one, Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you at the river of Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hands." But Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead you to victory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali and to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up to his heels, and Deborah went out with them. Now I am here to tell you, this story should not have happened. Deborah is listed as the fourth judge in the time of the Judges. Judges opens with the idea that everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes, which is to say, nobody was really following God. They just did what everyone else thought was right. Much not very dissimilar to what we are facing. But for a woman to rise in prominence, to be both a prophetess, a leader, a judge, and as she becomes a military leader, is unheard of. It just doesn't happen. And I think when you look at it, you have to ask why. And I will tell you that in many denominations, women are banned from being pastors. And there are many, many, many reasons for that. Some of them they use biblical quotes for. And it's interesting that the Quakers were early on willing to have women pastors. But one of the guys, when I was doing my recording studies, one of the men you have to study quite a bit is a guy named Gurney. And Gurney was a big time Quaker in the old days, and he wrote a book about Quakers. And one of the comments he made in his book was that the reason the Quakers allowed women to be pastors was there were so few good men willing to do it. Now, that's all well and fine, except Gurney's sister was also a pastor. And I always wanted to ask Gurney, I says, did you talk to your sister before you wrote the book? Because I have a feeling she might have had a different opinion. The truth of it is, women take roles of leadership when it's necessary. Deborah did just this. And in a society that men looked down on and considered them nothing but property, they not only respected, but in the case of Barak, literally followed a woman into battle. And I love it because God has a bad habit, and I use that as a pun and a satire, of taking what we think of as normal and turning on its head. Time and time again in the Bible, you see the figureheads, the people who should know and should be the leaders. And God says, no, that's not the one I chose. I'll be honest with you. You look throughout the Bible, Jacob and Esau, David and Saul, Eli's son and Saul, the Pharisees and John the Baptist. Literally, time and time again, God will take the person that the world considers least qualified and make them the leader. I love it because I think he does that intentionally so that we will not mistake when there is victory who won. Because too often, if I get something right and people say, hey, Rick, you did a good job there, I'm really willing to let them pat me on the back and say, well, thank you, I did a good job, didn't I? And forget that it wasn't me that did it, it was God. And sometimes by taking the people who can't possibly have done it, he shows you who really did it. In Deborah's case, he took her to victory that man could not have won. Literally, Israel had been fighting and losing battles with this army forever. And Deborah took and won it in one single blow. And there are a lot of things that is, I think, telling in this scripture. The fact that Barak is hesitant to go into battle without Deborah. It reminds me of Saul talking to Samuel. Now, Saul was an anointed king of Israel. He was a believer in the God of Yeshua, who was the God of Israel. But when it came to a battle that was overwhelming, he went to Samuel and says, you need to talk to the Lord your God. A very distinct point, if you'll notice. And Barak does the same thing. I will not go unless you go with me. He had faith that Deborah had faith, but his own faith was not that strong. And frankly, he wanted to make sure that Deborah was going to do this and was committed, because he knew what they were going to do was going to be almost impossible. And when Deborah says, yes, I'll do it, I think she's rubbing a little salt in the wound and says, okay, I'll go. But understand that the glory goes to a woman, not you. I think that for a general, that has to be a little bit of a, ouch kind of thing. But it is the truth. Barak is not going to go unless Deborah does. His faith in God is not the strength and faith that Deborah has. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in, where there are very few people who have the faith in God to step up and say, this is what God says, so this is what God's going to do, and we're going to do what God tells us to do. It reminds me a little bit of a minister in Florida who was saying he had trouble to get his message across to his congregation. He says, it's so beautiful here in the winter that heaven really doesn't interest folks here in Florida. And he says, and it's so hot in summer that hell doesn't scare them that much. And I think there is a little bit of truth to that, but I also think it's true of us as society. We very, very frequently find ourselves not believing what the Bible tells us. We do not take what God says and promises us without being a little doubtful or skeptical. We all sit here in church on Sunday morning and say, yeah, the Bible promises that God is always with me. Good, I like that. I believe that. Not a question mark in the world. And then Monday I go out and I face some really substantial problem. And I ask myself, what happened to the faith I had 24 hours ago? What happened to the certainty that I had that God took care of all things that I spoke of 24 hours ago, and now suddenly it disappeared? Barak, as he said, I will surely go with you, nevertheless, or I would say, Deborah said, the road I will not lead to your glory, but the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. It's interesting, and many, if you ever read Bible commentaries, you'll find out that people who write Bible commentaries are people who've read their Bibles, know them quite well, and then decide to write commentaries to explain to the rest of us how we should understand that scripture. And this section is very divided in the Bible commentary people, because some people will say when she was referring to that, she was referring to herself. And it certainly is applicable that Deborah was the leader, and certainly the glory would have gone to her. But if you read the rest of the story, you'll find that Sisera, when the battle turns away from him, fled by himself, and he went to a woman's tent and says, hide me, because they're coming to kill me. So she gave him a warm glass of milk, laid him down on a bed, and says, lay here and sleep, I'll hide you. And while he slept, she took a tent stake and she drove it through his head. When they tell you the Bible's nice and neat and sometimes friendly, I'm here to tell you the truth is not always there. Sometimes it's ugly. This woman, Jael, is what many Bible commentators believe, that the victory was literally in the hands of a Canaanite woman. She wasn't even an Israelite. She was just a nomadic tribe that lived next to Israel. And when she saw that this evil man was in her tent, she felt God saying, take him out. And she did. Whichever way you see it, whether Deborah won this victory, Joel won this victory, or even some who will claim that Barak did it, the truth of it is, the victory was won, and the other truth is that both Deborah and Jael did more direct actions than he did. The truth of this is, we do not have victories on our own strength and our own power. I will tell you time and time again, when you look at the Bible, when you look at religious leaders throughout time, the ones who succeed, the ones who do well, are the ones who trust God and who do not try to do it on their own strength. Deborah was neither qualified nor capable of leading an army into war, and yet she did just that. When you look at the Bible, again, like I said, time and time again, one of my other favorite stories is about a guy named Gideon. You've often heard about Gideon. When God calls him to be a general, he is hiding in a wine press threshing grain. To thresh grain, you have to lift a winnowing fork of wheat and lift it into the air so that the wind will take the chaff and blow it away. A wine press is an enclosed situation. He's winnowing his wheat in a wine press, a very ineffective way of doing it. But he's doing it out of fear, because he knows if he's seen, the enemy will take his wheat away from him. And an angel comes to him and says, "O mighty valor, man of God God is calling you. Now, I always thought that is a funny statement. I'm hiding from my enemy, doing something cowardly, like hiding in a wine press, and the angel comes and says, you're a mighty man of valor. It's like, something's not right here. And it's right. Gideon is not a mighty man of valor. He is a coward. However, he was a coward called by God, just as Deborah was called by God, to do a specific task. And the beautiful thing is, both of them answered, and both of them were blessed because they did what God called them to do. Many, many, many ministries today fall flat on its faces. And I will suggest many, many churches today fall flat on their face because they begin to rely on themselves and not on God. They begin to trust in their own strength and their own abilities and say, well, if we just hire a good enough pastor, if we just have a good enough council, if we just have a good enough this and this and this, our church will thrive. And my friends, let me tell you, that's a lie. There are not enough, and there aren't any good pastors, including me. We do the best we can with what we've got. And to be honest with you, the more I rely on my own strength, the more you're going to see me fail. The more you're going to see me fall flat on my face. The more I trust in God, the more you trust in God, the more opportunity we give to God to do great things. God does not pick the most likely people, the most competent people. He frequently picks the most incompetent. He frequently picks the least likely to do his work because he wants them to realize, and everyone else to realize, that this was not them doing it. It was God. Moses was called to answer to Pharaoh. You had to be an eloquent and articulate speaker to speak to Pharaoh because so many thousands of people wanted to talk to Pharaoh. Moses had a stutter. He didn't speak well. He didn't speak professionally. He was the last guy in the world, and he pointed that out to God. Lord, I don't do well with speaking. Send someone else. God says, no, I picked you. I'll let your brother go along, but I picked you. So guess what? God will frequently take the least qualified among us and make us capable of doing a job. If God calls you to do something and you're going, Lord, I can't do that because, and you start this long list of the becauses of what you can't do, know that God is sitting there laughing and going, I know all of that, and I'm still calling you. You are not ever underqualified to do God's work. You are never not prepared enough to do God's work. You can be, and most of us are, disobedient to following and saying, God, here's what you want me to do, and I'll do it. God does not take the qualified. He takes the unqualified. And the reason for that, like I said before, if you study Deborah and Barak, one of the problems that happened, and with Gideon, is that after the battle, everybody was praising them. Everyone was saying, this is great, these are great people, these are wonderful, they've done wonderful things. And you know, when people tell you that enough, you'll start believing it. You'll start actually thinking that maybe you are something. Maybe you are pretty good. And your head will begin to swell, and the moment your head starts to swell, God quits using you. And he will dump you like a hot potato. And I'm here to tell you, I have watched thousands of ministries fail because their leaders got swollen heads. It is reported that both Barak and Deborah went back and got very prideful and they were quickly replaced. When you are given victory by God, be very mindful that you realize this was God's doing. I've told you before, if I give you a great sermon and you tell me afterwards, what a great sermon that was, I say thank you. But the truth of it is, I should be saying, well, give it to God because I just was here. If I give you a stinker of a sermon, that one's mine. I didn't listen to God. And to be honest with you, it's pretty easy to tell. If I'm doing it, I will fail. If God is doing it, no matter how bad I screw it up, God will sit there and say, I'm going to make sense of all that. And I've seen him do it. I've had sermons I thought I bumbled through, and people said, wow. And I'm going, what do you mean, wow? That was the worst sermon I ever gave. And I go, no, I heard that clearly. Don't ask me how, but I do know that's what God does. The other thing you need to know from Deborah is that you can only do what God allows you to do. Too often, if God blesses us in one area of our life, we suddenly think, well, that means we can do this and this and this and this. And the truth of the matter is, God did not call me to be everything. I am not to be a famous YouTube pastor. I'm pretty sure of that. After a year or so of this, I can tell you that I can't even get the microphones right, let alone anything else. I'm okay with that. The YouTube is just a tool to tell people about Jesus Christ. What I do know God has called me to do is to be a pastor, to preach the good news of the gospel, to teach the truth. To forget that and to think that somehow I can also be this and this and this is forgetting that God does call me for specific reasons. And what your specific reason is for you to discern between you and God. But trust me, God has called you. You are alive today. I have talked to a young lady, and she wasn't that young, but she's at that age where she's very close to hospice. And she made the comment, why am I still here? Why am I still here? I don't feel like I'm of any use. And I said, I can't answer that question. But I do know who can. And that's a guy named God. You're here because of some reason that God decides you need to be here. What that is, I don't know. What your mission is, and trust me, there's a paraplegic who cannot raise their own hand, who has a dynamic ministry named Johnny Erickson Tata. She cannot even go to the bathroom by herself, and yet God is using her mightily. There is not a single person in this room who does not have the ability to serve God and has a ministry that God has called you to. My challenge is to you, like Deborah, it may not look like the ministry you think you were called for, and you may say, well, God is calling me to do this, but I'm not qualified. I'm not the right person. People will not respect me because of who I am. I'm here to tell you, Deborah had all those same excuses, and she threw them aside. You too need to do the same. God will use you. In fact, the less you are qualified, the more qualified that makes you to God. You do have to understand that God will bless you if you listen. Now, I'm here to tell you that it's very unlikely that God is going to take and call any of you to go lead somebody into battle. That's the good news. Some of you will probably prefer to go into battle than do what God is calling you to do. He may be calling you to share with friends or family. And you're going, Lord, I just as soon go fight a war. You don't know my family. These people are hard to get along with. That may be so. But God has called you to do that. That's what you need to be doing. I do know that obedience to God leads to success. Not obeying God leads to failure. And I'm here to tell you, we as Christians are living in a failed walk because we're trusting too much in our leaders, in our people, in our denominations to lead us and do everything, when we ourselves should be saying, I need to be in my Bible, I need to be praying, I need to be following what God's calling me to do. People talk to me all the time about revival, and I will tell you, we are in a time where revival is essential. If we're going to survive another 50 years in this country as a Christian church, revival will have to have happened. But I will tell you, it will not be cardinals and bishops that start that revival. It will not be pastors who start that revival. It will be people sitting in pews going, Lord, use me. Lord, take me and put me into the thick of it. There's a story of an assembly line worker that worked for Chrysler, and he was called up for jury duty, and the guy says, really, I'm a fairly important part of Chrysler, and I really think that I should be excused because, frankly, I need to be there. And the judge kind of sarcastically said, I suppose you were one of those people who think that Chrysler wouldn't operate without you. And the man humbly said, no, sir, quite the opposite. I think if they saw that they could go 2 or 3 weeks without me, they might realize they don't need me at all. And the judge says, you're excused. Like the Chrysler worker, we must come to the knowledge that Jesus Christ does what needs to be done in our lives. I'm not great. God does not want me or need me to be obedient. God can do things without me. What God does want is He wants me to be obedient and to follow Him. He wants me to say, Lord, whatever you want, I'll do. If you want to take me here, even though that's the last place in the world I want to be, then I will go. When it comes to facing down mighty powers, like enemies that do, and trust me, in 2021, no one is taking a weapon and coming after us right now. But you are being attacked. Your Christian values are being minimalized. They are being told that they're ridiculous myths. You're being told that you are nothing but fools. And in some cases, we're even considered domestic terrorists because we believe biblical truths and not the society's worldview. And I will tell you, that's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. So how do we face that? I want to take you to 2 Chronicles 7, verses 14 through 22. And this is God speaking to Samuel after he built the temple. And he's telling Samuel, fully knowing that the people who were right now celebrating the building of the temple, who were really godly people, and they were sacrificing, they were loving God, they were doing everything right. And God knew this won't last long. It won't be long, and you people are going to be blowing it big time. God says to Saul, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. For now I have chosen and consecrated this house, that my name may be there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there at all times. And as for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my rules, then I will establish your royal throne as a covenant with David your father, saying, you shall not lack a man to rule Israel. But if you turn aside and forsake my statutes and my commandments that I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will pluck you up from my land that I may be given to you, and this house that I have consecrated in by name, and I will cast it out of my sight, and I will make it a proverb and a byword among all the people. And at this house which was exalted, everyone passing by will be astonished and say, why has the Lord done this to the land and to this house? And they will say, because they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold of other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore he has brought all this disaster on them. They were consecrating a temple built by Solomon. Yeah. My brain's twisting names. That temple did not last very long before it was in fact destroyed, just as God said it would be. A guy named Herod built another one, even better. And in 70 AD, the Romans tore it down. If you go to Jerusalem today, you can go to the West Wall, and that's all that's left of the mighty temple. And it is, in fact, as God said, a byword. This was once the mighty temple of the people who followed God. How did this happen? And God gave the answer before it even happened. These people rejected me and they followed other gods. We must learn the lessons of the Bible. We must learn the lessons that Judges was trying to teach us through Deborah and all the other judges. If we don't, we will suffer the same consequences. I'm here to tell you that the world today looks an awful lot like the time of Judges. But, and there's a funny thing about that but. If most of you have ever went to English class, they'll say, whatever you say, when you say but, you just disregard everything that just said. And I'm here to tell you, we're a mess. But if we listen to God, if we do what Deborah did, God can take and change what's going on. He can take a mess and make something great out of it. I will tell you that we are living in a time where we will have to make choices as to whether or not we follow God or we follow the world. And unfortunately, sometimes those choices aren't as clear as we'd like them to be. Sometimes following the world will make more sense because it will not be as hard. It reminds me of a gal that was stopped at a stoplight and her car broke down. Busy intersection, and it wasn't long before everybody behind her was honking their horn, as they always do. And she was trying her best to start it, and finally she got up, went to the guy behind her, was honking his horn, and says, here, I can't get the car started. You go up and start my car, and I will honk your horn for you. That's a lot of what really needs to happen in the world today. There's a lot of horn honking going on, wanting to see change. There's a lot of people telling you this needs to change, that needs to change. We need a new government. We need this. We need that. My friends, what we need is to stop listening to the world and start listening to God. We need to stop letting the horns behind us try and push us away from God and put us towards God. Deborah can teach us how to live today if we listen. If I pay more attention to God than I do all the noise of the world and the horns behind me, God can and will show you the right way. And He will tell you when you say, I can't, how quickly He can prove you wrong. And my friends, it is a wonderful thing to be an unqualified person doing God's work and see God work through you when you know you had no part in it except to say, okay, God, let's do this. And I will tell you, as a pastor, I'm in that position frequently. I'm in that situation because when I'm here, I'm not doing this on my own strength, my own knowledge, and my own wisdom. I'm doing it because God is telling me, listen to me and speak what I tell you. If I do it right, we're all blessed. If I don't listen to God, we're in trouble. And the same is true for you. I think our sermon hymn is the best way to end this. Our love that will not let me go. Our God is a God who chooses to not let us go. You all turn to 485, please.